Okay, Dr. Gibson, back to you on the suitable institutional framework. Exactly here again, what are we talking about? And the more specific the example, the better.
Okay. Thank you very much. I think the one element is that if you look at the African continent, and one of the key challenges have been implementation of the plans, the blueprints that are in place, and the examples can go across from the AU Agenda 2063 and all the other developmental plans. But key in that is the issue of how do we put in place institutional mechanisms like to enhance coordination of the various players that need to undertake various actions for us to achieve that objective. And I think the institutional setup across the continent is also different in different countries. So I think that's another area that also needs continental support, regional support, where you could either come up with regional strategies or continental strategies that have a buy-in of the various countries and the various institutional mechanisms that then support the implementation of that. If it is at national level, as I've already talked about, you also need a facilitating regulatory environment that can, regulatory and legislative environment that will ensure that the measures in the plan can also be implemented, and there's continuity in the process.
When we talk about institutional mechanism and the institutional framework at the level of the country, are we talking about a specialized ministry that's dealing with the climate issues, or what are we talking about exactly? Specifically?
Yes, that's one. You also need, in some cases, in some countries, it could be the mandates of adaptation might not necessarily fall within one ministry, but they could be elements in the various ministries. But you then need a coordinating mechanism. There could be a lead ministry, but there is a coordinating mechanism either through a ministerial task force or a joint committee on implementing those aspects. But the other element in terms of institutional setup is also the capacity within the various institutions mandated to deal with adaptation and the competencies that they have to be able to deliver on that mandate.
Okay. Do you want to add something on the other side in Burkina Faso? Dr. Victor Skulik, do you want to add something here?
I think what we can also add is that it's not only a matter of minister or government. We can also consider what the individuals have as experience, as knowledge. For example, in Burkina Faso here, we have a compatriot who has received the Nobel Prize of I don't remember exactly the name in English, but this man has restored a very dry place of like 100 or 200 hectometers, and this place is now a place where many people are coming to share his experience. So when you are dealing with, for example, adaptation to climate change, some individuals can also be, human resource to also address the questions together with the minister. As he has mentioned, it should not be only the minister, but you may have coordination committee who are from different ministry, like from the finance, from health, because for sure the climate change is also affecting health. So how do you integrate this climate change in health questions, in health policies, for example? Yeah. So it has really to be addressed through the different ministers, but we can also include the associations, the local associations, the individuals, yeah, to make sure that we also consider all the aspects of the question.
Okay, thank you very much. Now about Dr. Gibson, again, back to the titles that you mentioned at the beginning, and that we need to support the adaptation plans with evidence-based, reliable information, scientific research. How readily available is this kind of data in Africa, Dr. Gibson?
Thank you very much. I think generally the issue of data has been a key challenge on the African continent. And I think add to that the issues of adaptation and the scientific data related to that is also an area where there are huge capacity gaps. And when you talked about, because some of these things together, this data, you would require a lot of data and surveys. For example, one of the indicators of readiness, if you are also looking at issues of literacy in the country, you are also looking at the poverty indicators among those. So you need certain indicators that can show that a country is adaptive capacity. So generating of that data and capacitating of the national statistical systems to be able to generate the data and be able to monitor the implementation of the plans then becomes a key element. And I think the issue of capacity there is an issue. It's not readily available, and it needs to be collected in the formats that can be usable by policymakers and scientists. So this speaks also to the issue of the broader community of researchers and technical institutions to also create knowledge that can enhance awareness of these issues and monitor implementation.
Okay, all right, very important. Do you want to add on the other side, Dr. Victor's colleague? Do you want to add anything here at the level of data?
No, this is, no, thank you.
Okay, all right. And I think the link to the data, again, the human capabilities, all right, of the institutions and the human capabilities, of course, of getting there. Okay, let us move on now to, again, the key point that you mentioned, Dr. Gibson. It's very important, managing the expectations. Whose expectations are we talking about here? Are we talking about the expectations of the people, or are we talking about the expectations of the governments, or who? Managing whose expectation?
Okay. I think when you look at it, the issue of climate change, at one point, it was more like it's a domain of scientists. These are issues that are being raised by scientists that have no impact in terms of policy. But when you look at now, climate change is a serious developmental issue, which also need to be addressed at the policy level. So there is need for policymakers to be adequately provided with scientific information that can be used to inform the policies that they are making in terms of adaptation. But at the same time, you also have other institutions that might be lobbying for policy changes. But in that regard, there is also need for expectation management in terms of what can be achieved within a specific period of time, which can be determined either by the resource envelope that's available, or also determined by the other competing priorities within the country. So there is need of meeting of minds in terms of what can be achieved within a specific period of time, given the various constraints that also governments tend to be faced with, particularly African governments.
So we're talking about setting priorities, right, and talking together about what needs to go first. Okay.
Yes.
And but is there awareness by the people? Okay, because when we talk about managing expectations, we often have the societies themselves. Is there clear awareness of how dangerous the situation is by the people in Africa and the different countries, or the awareness there is not strong because the developmental needs and the difficulties of life in many areas sort of take over or are of higher priority? What do you think? Maybe I'll start with Dr. Victor's side and then come back to you, Dr. Gibson.
Yeah, thank you for the questions. I think there is still a real need for awareness the populations, the societies, the communities. We, as Dr. Gibson has mentioned, many times when we talk about climate change, people think that this is scientists' problem. It's not their problem. That they think that it's just scientists that are creating data that threatening them for something that will never happen, but they are living these situations all already. As he was also talking about managing the expectations, we have in many communities here some artisanal, local exploitation of gold. And the one doing this exploitation, they are using some chemicals that are not really environment friendly. So if you go to these people and tell them, stop exploiting this resource, definitely they will just kill you. They will just kill you. So there is a serious need to explain to them how these chemicals they are using will affect the environment, their health, their development, in the future. So and it is not something that you can just solve in one day. It has to be a tough work for every day and for a long period. But at the same time, you should also offer them an alternative solution. Because if you come and tell me, okay, stop this, it's not a good thing for your health, for your development, but at the same time, there is a need to survive because this is the only thing they can do to survive. So you are just telling them, okay, just go and die in your corner because we don't want you to destroy our environment. At the same time, you are somewhere, you have food, you have water, you have you have your needs fed, but this one, he needs to exploit this resource to also survive. So there is real need to continue this work of awareness. And I think it should start, as I said, at individual level, at community level, before that we come to the national level with the politics and then the strategies at institutional level and so on. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that's a very, very valid point, and you definitely have to give him an alternative, because telling him don't use it is like telling him go die. You're absolutely right. You have to give him the alternative. Back to you, Dr. Gibson, again. Financing those adaptation plans, the finance issue. Okay, this is again one of the, of course, key elements of the in supporting the adaptation readiness of countries. How do you see it? How do you see the problem in Africa?
Okay, thank you very much. If you allow me just to add a point, then I'll come to that from what was just being mentioned by the other colleagues. I think on the issue of awareness, I think that's a critical element that needs to be looked at, and I think that's a role that can also be played by knowledge generation institutions that can also provide that knowledge and be able to package the scientific information on climate change to be able to be used by local communities, because we are also saying some of the actions will be locally determined, and so they also need to be equipped with adequate information. But coming to the point you raised on finance, I think there's need to link climate finance with national adaptation efforts and plans on the continent, and the financing structures, including the national budgets, should be able to support integration of adaptation in sector and local level development. As I had already mentioned earlier on, that they need to speak to each other, and one way they can speak to each other is to ensure that they are adequately resourced. But we also know most African countries are also struggling even with their national budgets to be able to mobilize sufficient resources from domestic resources to fund their budgets. And that's an area that we also need development partner support to be able to ensure that those countries which are at a lower level of development and that need to be adequately supported to be able to implement the adaptation plans can be assisted to do so. considering the level of development and other developmental challenges that are in place. For example, we already have countries burdened with the response to the COVID-19 and the response and the recovery of their countries. But at the same time, they are required also to be able to implement these adaptation plans. So I think financing is a key issue, which can be from domestic resources, but also from the international community. And linked to that is also when you also look at the debt profile of some of these countries, which are heavy, that can also militate against their response to adaptation, climate adaptation. That would be my submission.
Yes. Okay, very important. Again, on the other side, Dr. Victor, would you like to add something on the finance?
Just to share an idea of financing, it's a real problem also, as we have mentioned it before. And for example, you have how you excuse me. Yeah, when it is come to financing the adaptation, the readiness to climate change, yeah, you need also to think about local funding, because what is also known is that when people are used to receive funding from another person from abroad, they may not adequately use it, okay? But if this finance come from themselves, if the community can themselves finance, you know, the action, the strategies of adaptation in the local community, it can have more effect. It can be more sustainable than funding received from abroad, from other institutions, because we all know that these institutions, they are not there for life. They are there for a given time, and then they will go because there is no more fund to finance the actions. So we need also to encourage this local funding when it comes to addressing the question of readiness of adaptation. This is just what we want to share with you.
Do you have are there specific existing examples of this, of community efforts in that direction? Communities financing, locally financing readiness, adaptation readiness?
Yeah, you have, for example, some forests that have been declared like protected forests by the community. So they decided that from now on, no one should go there and cut any tree. See, and it means that they are using also, as we said, other means to deal with their daily needs. Okay, and this is something that will preserve this environment, this local environment, and just imagine that the other communities also do the same, preserving the environment. So at the end, we have local actions taken with low finance, but with high results and sustainable effects. So this is, for example, what we want to mention.
Do you have a name of the community or of a country where this is actually happening? What is
Yeah, in the West, for example, you have a place called Dendereso. Dendereso, it's a local protected environment. There is also a place that they call the Genget. The Genget, there is a river there, and all around you have a forest with really rare species of trees. And then the community, the local community, they are protecting this place. And it's a place where even nationals are going for tourists or to rest, to spend time during the weekends or the holidays. And this is a way for the community to sell some local souvenir during the stay of these visitors. See. And in the same way, we also have what we call in Ouagadougou the Parc Bangerewego. It has been set up by an individual, now taken by the commune of Ouagadougou, and they are managing this forest as a place where people can go for jogging. They even have some animals that you can visit, and you just pay a kind. It's not compulsory to pay something, but when you go there, they show you how they are preserving the environment, how you should help them also to protect the environment. And it has been raised by an individual action, per se. So you have few of these examples here that we can mention regarding this way.
Okay, no, I think that's very interesting and very useful. Let's move on now to a question that has many dimensions. If we are talking about what is needed as top priority to be done in order to improve the adaptation readiness, okay, and take it to the next level of protecting the environment and at the same time achieving the development of Africa. What would be expected from the communities? You already mentioned the communities protecting the forests and declaring them as places where trees would not be cut, etc. This is a role. Okay. I want to ask Dr. Gibson to say more about what can be done at the level of the communities. After that, for everybody to be ready, I will ask about the communities first, and then I will ask about what is needed by the governments, okay, what is needed at the regional level, what is needed from the international organizations, and what is needed at the COP27 by the conference itself and the decisions there. So we are going to go from one to the other. So about the communities, Dr. Gibson, would you like to add to what our colleague here mentioned, our brother here mentioned, the protection of the forests by the communities themselves, even if they're providing low finance for it, but they're doing something at the communities level, since we're going to from the bottom up, what would we need to do more than that? Dr. Gibson.
Okay. I think there are multiple efforts that can be done. The first is, like I said earlier on, to look at this could be a multi stakeholder approach, and look at what the various stakeholders can do to be able to sustain efforts that are happening at community level. So there's the issue of awareness of the climate change challenges, and also hear from the local communities what the proposed solutions could be. So we have a kind of like a bottom-up planning in terms of setting of priorities in that area. Then you also need facilitatory policies that can be done by governments to be able to facilitate and initiate efforts by the community, including the private sector, to crowd them in to be able to support the efforts that are happening at community level. And this could be supported either through their corporate social responsibilities or within the ESG framework to support local community efforts on adaptation. And also once that's also done, is actually popular, also you have a media coverage of some of the best practices that are emerging that can also enable other communities to replicate efforts that are happening either in the country or even within the continent at large, where we are looking at these grassroots type initiatives and how those can be replicated elsewhere. So there will be some benchmarking exercise that can happen. So that would be my submission.
Yeah, what is meant by ESG? How ESG is a short of what? Excuse my
environmental social governance framework.
Okay, environmental social governance framework. Okay, and this would be different from CSR. CSR is the corporate social responsibility.
Social corporate responsibility. Yes, I think the ESG is now taking consideration more concretely issues of the environment and the governance framework thereof.
Oh, I see. And the private sector, what can the private sector do more for the communities? Because we didn't talk about the private sector yet.
Yeah, when we talk about because we are also saying this issue that we are talking about, it cannot only be funded by governments alone. They might not have adequate resources to do so. But the private sector players also do have resources which they can use to be able to support adaptation efforts at the local level. For example, you are also looking at private sector players who are, say, in the mining sector, whose activities can actually also impact on the environment and I mean, exacerbate some of the climate change issues. But they could also be responsible in working with communities in, say, rehabilitation of some old mines or rehabilitation of areas that they've been operating on, or even the issue of regenerating forests in some areas that have been dilapidated. So those efforts can also, if the private sector can see a business sense in doing so, they can deploy resources to that area.
That's a very, very important point, not only in supporting the society, but actually in adjusting the way they operate and they do their business in a way that respects the climate. But they need to be incentivized in order to do that. They need to have incentive in order to change the way they do things. And this is where governments need to come in. I'll move on to governments on Dr. Victor's side. Do you want to add something on the communities, or we move right away to the government?
Yeah, I think we already mentioned about what the community can do as action, and we may talk about the government level. Yeah, at the government level, I think it's, as we previously mentioned, to integrate this question in all the action taken. I mean, in all the ministers. Yeah, it should be considered. It should be a key question for every minister to think of, how we address the questions in their plan, so that they can see how going from the minister, they can encourage the community or the individuals to adhere to the decision made by the government. Because if at governmental level, we just take policies and we don't think of, how the community, they see it, how they can implement it, at the end, we have good policies, but with no result. Yeah, so this is a point. And the thing is that integrating the questions in all the ministers will also consolidate the efforts, so that we have the same question, but taking in consideration all the aspects when it comes to, for example, the finance, when it comes to the development, or when it comes to health or education. For example, the education, I mean, the demand changing that we are talking about can be integrated in the education policy, for example. And this will need, for example, to review the tool that they use to teach at the schools. And this should need some financing, some extra funding. Yeah, so at the governmental level, it's something that needs to be really integrated in all the ministers, and then considering the needs and the awareness of the communities or the individuals.
Okay, thank you very much. I think it's very important point, not just to have good policies, but make sure those policies get implemented and understood by everybody. And this means cascading the policies, down to all levels of implementation in the right way, and collaborating between ministries also. Dr. Gibson, on the government level, what would you add?
Yeah, I think government plays a very critical role in this area, and in terms of providing even policy direction in areas that can also be invested in. For example, you talked about they need to be in private sector need to be incentivized. Who incentivizes? It's government. that is having incentives to be able to direct funding from the private sector to be invested in areas that can enhance climate adaptation. For example, you are also providing incentives that can encourage private sector to invest in the renewable sector. And that could also further enhance the adaptation and the resilience of the economy to climate change. So the issue of policy is one. The other area is also having the legislative frameworks, which can also be happening through our parliaments, which also means our parliaments should also be awareness raising in terms of the importance of climate change adaptation from a parliamentary perspective, and also government in terms of resourcing. We talked about the national budget being a critical tool to implement government programs. And once your national budgets are also taking into account the issue of climate adaptation, that's already a positive in terms of from a government point of view. And also in terms of even monitoring the actions as a country, that happens at government level. And also government is also involved in discussing and with other national, within the regional economic communities, on regional protocols, on strategies that are related to climate adaptation. And so government also need to be capacitated in that regard to be able to engage at those levels for the benefit of the continent and for the benefit of the respective countries. So government plays a very critical role.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely plays a very critical role, and it's not only towards its own people, but also even at the regional level to be able to make a difference there. Absolutely, absolutely.